Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how to draw a hedgehog in charcoal. I'm going to use charcoal pencils and some willow charcoal and some other stuff. So we're going to start with a sketch. The reference photo will be in the description if you want to check it out. I'm going to make some minor changes to it. I want to make it look a little bit more round. I'm going to make the legs look a little bit shorter because I want it to look cute. Anyway, I'm going to do the sketch with a graphite pencil, and after that I'll switch to charcoal as usual. The charcoal pencils, I'm going to use Maestro woodless charcoal pencils, 2 grades, medium and soft. I'm also going to use willow charcoal, and the paper I'm working on is 5 times 7 inches in size. It's a Fabriano sketching paper. So I'm starting to work with a charcoal pencil, and first I'm going to go over some parts of my sketch with this medium charcoal pencil, just to make sure that some of these details are a little bit larger, because once I start working with willow charcoal, things are going to get messy and I'm going to want some of these details to stay in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shade a little bit of the background. This is going to be like a vignette, so I'm not going to draw all of the background, but I want to have just enough of the background, or just enough value in the background to create contrast with some of the lighter parts of the main subject's body. So because the light source is coming from above, the upper part or the upper edge of the hedgehog's body is going to be lighter. It's going to be catching light from above. So I shaded that part with some willow charcoal, then I started blending with a brush, and then I started adding a little bit at a time, just to make sure that I have enough value to create contrast with the lighter part of the back. After that, I decided to get into some details. So these spikes or pricks are going to be probably the most detailed and the trickiest part of this drawing. But before I get into drawing those, I'm going to define some other parts of the body. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow around the edge of the ear, and here between the head and the neck. So those are going to be some of the shadow areas where this fur is a little bit longer. So I want to define some of those larger parts or larger segments of the body, and that prickly part of the body will end right about here where I'm starting to work with a piece of willow charcoal. So I'm going to start with willow charcoal first. Now the interesting thing about willow charcoal is that it doesn't really stick to the surface of the paper as much as compressed charcoal from my charcoal pencils, and it's much more easy to modify, but it's also easier to erase. So right now it looks pretty dark, but it's not going to remain that dark once I start blending, and I can easily take away value from it. So I'm laying it down so that I'm already imitating the shape and the texture of those quills or those spikes on top of the hedgehog's body. And obviously the hedgehog has thousands of them, literally thousands of those quills. So I made quite a few of those marks, not exactly thousands, but because I don't need to draw every single one, but quite a few of them. Now to add even more value to some of those details here, I used a soft charcoal pencil. The soft charcoal pencil is even darker than the medium charcoal pencil I used previously, and I'm going to want some of those darker bits to stay. That's why I used a charcoal pencil. After that, I started blending again. But this time I picked up a slightly harder brush. So initially, for that lighter background, I used a soft synthetic brush, which blends very smoothly and moves the material around gently. Now this harder bristle brush And both of them are flat brushes, obviously. this harder bristle brush tends to push the material into the grain of the paper a little bit harder, but at the same time it allows you to preserve that texture. So it already leaves a bit of those lines which I laid down, because I don't want to lose all of those. I want to leave those suggestions of those quills. Just soften them a little bit, just to increase that illusion like there are thousands of them, because obviously I didn't draw thousands of them, I drew dozens of marks. But when I blend with my brush, it makes it look like there are more of them. So to further refine that, I'm also going to add a few marks with a medium charcoal pencil, just to make this whole thing look or seem a little bit more complex, and to add some of those finer, smaller pricks. And obviously, for the most part, I have to use sharp charcoal pencils. At the bottom and around the middle, I added a little bit more of the soft charcoal pencil. And then I did some more blending. So this is just the first stage where I lay down the texture and the value, but after that the final touch, of course, will be done with my erasers. I will work with a Tombow Mono 0 eraser for the most part, and what that's going to do, it's going to make these quills look more three-dimensional. It's going to make them stand out. So when you look at the reference, you will see that these spikes on top of these quills on top of the hedgehog's body, or on hedgehog's back, they appear lighter, and they appear lighter for two reasons. First, they are of lighter color at the tip, and second, because that tip is sticking out, it's going to appear lighter because it's popping out of the shadow and it's closer to the light source. So I want to have a lot of those darker values in between those lighter marks. And another thing that I'm doing here, I'm controlling the amount of pressure with my marks when I'm using this Tombow Mono 0 eraser, because at the bottom, where those pricks are further away from the light source, I'm going to want to make the contrast a bit more subdued. And at the top, I'm going to want to have cleaner, slightly lighter marks. So occasionally I will clean my eraser, or I will cut the tip so that I get a nice sharp edge to work with. So that's just something you need to keep in mind when working with a Tombow Mono 0 eraser, because it doesn't always have to erase very sharp, clean marks. It can create slightly muddy or darker marks depending on how you use it. And I may also use a kneaded eraser for this, but I think it would be a lot more time consuming because I would have to keep kneading it and reshaping it. And I'm not sure that I would get the type of marks that I want. So in that respect, the Tombow Mono 0 eraser is obviously far more convenient, because you can use it just like you would a pencil, except for the fact that instead of drawing darker marks, I'm drawing lighter marks to indicate the tips of these quills. At the top here, you can see how I'm pulling these lighter marks and how they are starting to stand out against that background. This is why I shaded the background first, because I wanted that those quills at the top to be lighter, and I wanted them to stand out in contrast against that part of the background. And what that does, it makes my subject look more three-dimensional, and it gives the scene a little bit more depth, maybe makes everything look a bit more three-dimensional. It gives the illusion of volume and depth to the viewer. So to further refine these, I picked up the kneaded eraser because I needed some really clean marks, and I dabbed on top to make those spikes at the top even lighter. And now I think I have a decent amount of contrast, so I can move on to the rest of the body. The rest of the body, under these spikes on the lower part of the body, around the sides and the belly area, is covered with softer fur. So there are no quills or no spikes there. So there I'm going to try to imitate the appearance of regular softer fur, I'm just going to lay down the texture of the fur using a medium charcoal pencil, as I normally do when I draw furry animals. And as usual, I will pay attention to two rules when drawing fur. I will pay attention to the length of the fur and the direction of the fur, because once I start blending with a brush, that texture, those lines will still remain there. They will still be visible. They will be a little bit softer, but they're still there. So it's important for me to be patient when I lay down the texture of the fur, and it's important for me not to mess it up, and it's important that I make sure that the length of my strokes and the direction of my strokes matches the length and the direction of the fur. This looks a little bit too dark now, but that's okay, because I'm going to be reworking it again with a Tombow Mono Zero eraser. But just before that, I'm just going to add a few darker marks with a soft charcoal pencil to indicate some of the deeper, darker shadow areas, and maybe to connect some of these shadows at the bottom to indicate that this lower part of the body is completely facing away from the light source, so it needs to be considerably darker. A bit more blending with a brush, and then finally, as a final touch, just like I did with those quills at the top, I'm going to pull some lighter marks using the pencil eraser, the Tombow Mono Zero eraser, which, like I said, is a very convenient tool. If you don't have this one, you can also use the Kohinoor pencil eraser or Faber-Castell pencil eraser, or you can just use a kneaded eraser. It'll work. It's just that, like I said, I feel like this is more convenient and a little bit faster to work with. So I've done that part of the body, the sides and the belly and the chest area, which is all covered with softer fur. And now I added a bit more value to the right of the head, because I want the lighter hair on the right side of the head to stand out against the background. So I'm going to pull some lighter marks here just to establish that edge between the head and the background to the right, and then I'm going to start working on the details on the head. So I drew the outer edge of the eye here, drawing a little bit of shorter fur around it, and then I moved on to the eye itself. I have a couple of very nice sketch lights in the eye. I'm going to want these to remain bright. And in order for them to remain bright, I have to reserve the white space. And how do I do that? Well, I will simply work around it. I will draw the darker areas around the lighter areas, and I will try not to muddy the lighter areas and not to cover them with charcoal. Because if I try to work the other way around, if I just drew the darker values first and then tried doing some erasing, I wouldn't get these catch lights to look quite as bright, and also I wouldn't be able to get a nice clean edge between the darker part of the eye and those catch lights. So that's why I think it's important to reserve the white space when you can. And now I'm laying down the texture of this shorter fur on the head. So obviously the length of the fur varies depending on the part of the body. So here on the head, especially around the eyes and the nose, the hair is going to be quite a bit shorter than on the sides and on the belly area. So you need to keep that in mind and adjust the length of your strokes accordingly. So the marks that I'm making here, the strokes that I'm making here are quite a bit shorter, and I'm still going to blend them in pretty much the same manner with a soft brush and refine them in the same manner by using the Tombow Mono Zero eraser on top of them. So right now I'm just trying to define the shape of those front legs a little bit. And like I said, I decided to make them look a bit more tucked in, a little bit shorter than in my reference, because I want the animal to look a little bit more round and a little bit cuter. So here I'm softening the those lines, that fur on the head. And you can see that as I'm doing that, the lines are still more or less there, they are still visible, the texture is still there, but it gets a lot softer, and it gets the volume because it starts to appear more natural, and it starts to look like there's more hair there, because when you just pull a few lines or a few marks, it doesn't really look like fur until you start blending. Here I added a bit of value under the hedgehog just to indicate that there is a bit of ground and grass under it, and also a little bit of texture. So I blended that with that harder bristle brush as well. I'm trying to work around the legs, although I will later refine and those edges and those smaller shapes. And I can also use tortillon to help me with that, to go into these smaller spaces between the individual fingers, because that requires a little bit more precision. And I'm just going to soften the lower part of the ground here and kind of fade it towards the bottom, because as I already mentioned, I want this to be a vignette, so I have no intention of drawing all the way to the edge of the paper or covering the entire paper. And now I'm just doing a little bit of refining here and there, cleaning up some of the details, maybe adding a few details to the ground, and cleaning up some of the edges or some of the details on those legs, just to see if I can define their shape a little bit better, even though these are fairly small shapes. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of refining on the head, make some parts of the area around the nose a little bit darker. And also I'm going to do a little bit more work with a Tombow Mono Zero eraser to pull a few marks on the head, and maybe to try to emphasize that edge between the head and the background, because that is also important, because I need to have a few flyaway hairs there, and I need to have more contrast between that right side of the head and the background. So I think that due to that contrast, the main subject now stands out nicely against the rest of the background. So the drawing is almost done. I'm just going to keep doing a little bit of refining, especially here at the top, where I feel like some of these quills maybe need to stand out a little bit more, and some of them maybe need to be a little bit lighter, so that there would be a bit more contrast between the background and the main subject. And I'm doing that with a kneaded eraser because I don't want to muddy things or spoil some of the edges and some of the shapes that I already drew. I also added a few more marks and a little bit of value on the left side. And as you can see, now I'm almost done. I'm just going to put my signature here in the lower right corner, and that's it. So the drawing is finished. I hope you enjoyed the drawing process, and I hope you found it useful. Don't forget to give me a like, comment, and check out my other videos. And for more content and longer videos, check out my Patreon. Bye for now.